Can you hear me? Okay. The Lord be with you. It's great to be here with you today. A real privilege. I want to thank Bishop Palmer for this invitation, as well as Barb Scholas, D. Stickley Minor, Renee Street, and others who had a hand in extending the invitation. You know, from time to time, I do get invitations to speak other places, but it is a special honor and privilege to be here with my own beloved West Ohio Conference. Sometime back, I attended a conference on theology and disability. One of the speakers at this conference was a man named Randy Smith. And Randy is an author, an artist, a poet, and a minister. And he also lives with a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which means that he has to use a wheelchair. He doesn't have use of his arms and legs, and he relies on assistance for everyday tasks like eating and bathing, and even pushing his glasses up on his nose. Here's a man who's lived with disabilities for decades. And here's how he began his talk. He said, "I'm a guy who's working it out. Who are you?" And I thought, yeah, that's right. I mean, that's it. I'm a guy who's working it out. I mean, my life circumstances are very different than Randy's. But I'm a guy who's working it out. I understand so little of God. I make halting and feeble attempts to understand the nature of human existence. I'm a guy who's working it out. Or as I tell my students, at least 30% of what I teach is wrong. I just don't know which 30% it is. So today, I want to share with you a little bit about how I've been working it out over the last 10 years or so. When I was a grad student, I heard a lecture by the theologian Frances Young. Now, if you've never heard Frances Young, she is an absolutely brilliant theologian, a British Methodist, and she has a son named Arthur. Now, Arthur's probably about my age, but he never developed intellectually beyond about 14 months of age. He was born with very significant intellectual disabilities. And Young's own theological journey, which she has written about in a few different places, has been shaped profoundly by life with Arthur. Now, in this lecture, she was reflecting on the incarnation, and particularly the Christian concept of kenosis. This is a Greek word. It means emptying. And we get this word from the hymn that is embedded in Philippians 2, 5 through 11. Christ, having the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, being born in human likeness. There was one particular line that stuck out for me in that lecture. In the incarnation, God takes on human weakness. In the incarnation, God takes on human weakness. God in Christ became subject to all the vulnerabilities of human life, including pain, sadness, physical disempowerment, and death. In the incarnation, God took on human weakness. Fast forward to 2006, I was in my second semester teaching at United, and my wife was 9 months pregnant at the time. It was Thanksgiving Day, and so my wife and my older son Luke and I are in the car on our way to Thanksgiving lunch at a colleague's house, and we were following some friends who were in their car, the Vickers family. Some of you know Jason Vickers. And as we were on the way to the lunch, my wife started having contractions. And I looked over at her. She had tears streaming down her face. I knew we were not going to make it to lunch. And so I called the Vickers. They pulled over. We put Luke in the car with them. And my wife and I took a detour to Miami Valley Hospital. Sean David Watson, our second son, had decided to make an appearance, and he wasn't going to wait any longer. So Sean was born. And everything looked okay, and I'm on the phone. I call my family back in Texas, and they've got the whole extended family over at their house, and yay, we got a baby, you know, and everyone's happy and celebrating. It's a great thing, you know, it's a great and wonderful thing. We have a new baby in the family. About 4 hours after Sean was born, my son Luke, we're marveling at him in the neonatal ward of the hospital, and our pediatrician came up to me. And she didn't look right. She said, "Mr. Watson, we have some serious concerns about your son." And I said, "What kind of concerns?" And she said, "Well, we think he may have Down syndrome." And I felt like someone had just hit me between the eyes with a baseball bat. I mean, the world went gray. I was in shock. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stand up. And Luke, who is 4, standing beside me, holding my hand, looks up at me and says, "What's wrong with my baby brother?" Now, the strangest thing happened at that moment. A sentence that I had heard in an academic lecture years before just popped into my head. In the incarnation, God takes on human weakness. Now, to this day, I believe that that is what my charismatic friends call a word of wisdom. In the incarnation, God takes on human weakness. As devastated as I was in that moment, I knew it was going to be okay. I knew God was with us. We had not been abandoned. And I knew right then that God was going to work even through that moment and through our life with Sean. Now, I'll be honest with you. I mean, the emotional pain was real. It was intense. And I was scared. But I knew that my faith could bear this pain. Now, it's been quite a journey since then. Sean was born with a hole in his heart, and he couldn't get enough oxygen, so he couldn't gain weight. At about 4 months of age, he weighed 10 pounds. And the doctors had him on this formula that I call liquid gold because it was so expensive. And it was really thick stuff, but he couldn't really keep it down. So at 4 months of age, Sean had heart surgery, and open heart surgery, which went very well. But since then, he's been in the hospital many times. He's had his tonsils removed, his adenoids removed, a hole in his eardrum repaired, which since has reappeared. We incurred significant medical expenses. We have made many late-night trips to the hospital because, especially early on, Sean was very susceptible to respiratory infections and had difficulty breathing. My wife is going to heaven, by the way. She has taken Sean to countless appointments with heart specialists, ENT specialists, speech therapists, physical therapists, special education teachers, and others who have been involved in the very important process of early intervention. Now, I want to be clear about something here. This story that I'm telling you isn't a sob story. My wife and I wouldn't have chosen for our son to have Down syndrome, but he has enriched our lives beyond measure. I mean, our lives are vastly better because Sean is a part of them. Our family is stronger. Our awareness of the diversity of God's creation has increased. Our awareness of disability issues has grown immeasurably. We have had the opportunity to meet amazing people and to grow in faith and character. My son Luke is 14 now. He is wise beyond his years. I mean, look, he still messes up. He's 14. But he is wise beyond his years. He has a compassionate spirit and a gift of empathy. I thank God for Sean and for the ways in which God has blessed us through him. Now, today he is a happy and healthy 9-year-old. He loves to play Angry Birds. He loves to jump on the trampoline, but his favorite pastime is bugging his big brother, and he really excels at that. Sean is extremely mischievous, and at one point on Thanksgiving Day, perhaps to celebrate his birthday, he took my glasses and put them in the fireplace with a fire going. So by the time I found them, they were beyond recovery. My wife once found him hanging out of our living room window by his fingertips, trying to escape into the backyard. Sometime back when Harriet was putting Sean in the bath, she stepped out of the bathroom for a moment, and he jumped up, closed the bathroom door, and locked it with the water still running. Now, my wife had a coat hanger, and she's trying to jimmy the lock open, and she's begging him to open the door. And not only will he not open the door, but he's doing this kind of evil mad scientist laugh, going, ha, 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 ha. And so finally, my older son, Luke, comes upstairs and he goes, hey, Sean, want to fight? And the door opens right up, and there he is. Sean loves his family, and at times he'll take my wife and my elder son and me by the hand and bring us all together and lead us in a group hug. Now, since he was born, I've been on a steep learning curve. I've been learning about theology and disability. I've learned about the Bible and disability, ministry with people with disabilities, and I still have a lot more to learn. Remember, I'm a guy who's working it out. But here are a few things that I've learned. First, about 1 in 5 people, about 20% of the population of the United States lives with some form of disability. Now, here's what I mean by that. 1 in 5 people lives with a physical or mental impairment that can inhibit normal functioning in society. 1 in 5 people lives with a physical or mental impairment that can inhibit normal functioning in society. Now, this might be a physical disability that requires one to use a wheelchair. It might be something like autism. It might be Down syndrome. It might be some form of mental illness. In particular, the number of kids on the autism spectrum is growing. We don't know why, but right now the CDC estimates that 1 in 68 kids is somewhere on the autism spectrum. Now, the numbers just get bigger. 7% of children are diagnosed with ADHD. 8% have a learning disability. 14% have a developmental disability. 17% of Americans experience a communications disorder. 25% of 13 to 18-year-olds have an anxiety disorder. According to the National Organization on Disability, about 85% of people with and without disabilities, so everyone, right, people with and without disabilities, 85% state their religious faith is important in their lives, but only 47% of people with disabilities attend church at least once a month. And I think it's especially hard for parents who have a kid with a disability to find a church that is willing to do what is necessary to welcome that kid into the community. And a lot of parents, I mean, I've seen this happen. They just quit trying. They just quit trying to find a church. Okay, second, for those of us who do not have a physical, mental, or emotional disability, if we live long enough, we will I've heard in the disability community, people without disability called TABs, temporarily able-bodied. Third, while more and more churches have some kind of ministry with people with disabilities, there are a lot that maybe haven't seen the need yet or don't know really how to get started with it. And you know, the result of this is that about 20% of the population either won't feel welcomed or will not be physically able to attend church. Fourth, the most important thing about disabilities ministry is not a ramp, and it is not the availability of assistive listening devices, but it is the attitude of the people in the congregation. Yes, accessibility is important. It's really important. But simply putting a wheelchair ramp in your church isn't going to bring people with disabilities into your congregation. It's just going to remove a physical barrier that was keeping them out. I want to show you a video here of the church I attend. This is Stillwater United Methodist Church. This program that we're going to see here has been really effective in making families, especially with children with disabilities, feel welcome in the church.
About 1 in 5 people in the United States has some form of disability. And there are a lot of families of kids with disabilities who just quit trying to come to church because they don't feel welcome or because they don't feel like the church can or will accommodate their child. So I'm really pleased that Stillwater is starting this ministry. I'm stoked about it. I support it 100%, and I'm really grateful for it. Hi.
And I'm really, really excited because come this fall, we're going to launch a program for special needs kids because there is such a huge need for that. I'm an occupational therapist in the school, and so I get the privilege of seeing the families and what some of their struggles are firsthand.
My experience has been absolutely amazing. It's really changed my perspective on a lot of things. The kids are great.
Yeah, a kid like Sean needs a little bit of extra attention. But apart from that, he doesn't need really anything particularly different than other kids do. Sometimes he might have a little bit harder time obeying the rules, or he might, aides in the classroom might have a harder time understanding him. But generally speaking, you know, dealing with Sean is just like dealing with any other kid.
It's very nice to have a church family where we can come in and our children are embraced, our special needs children, along with our typical children.
I think people will be surprised how much they can learn from working and spending time with people with disabilities.
And here at Stillwater, we've found a ministry where our child who's in a wheelchair, who is nonverbal and can't tell somebody what she needs, that she can go into the classroom and there's somebody there with her, working specifically with her. And if she has a need, they can take her to another area. She can have quiet time. They can work one-on-one with her. All her needs are met. And we as a family, my partner and I, can sit in church and we don't have to worry.
And if we ignore those folks, we're not only ignoring our mandate to love one another that Christ gave to us, but we're also ignoring the church's evangelistic mandate. I mean, these are people who need Jesus Christ. These are people who need a community around them. They need the abiding presence of the Holy Spirit, and they're not going to receive all of these things outside of the Christian community of the church.
To welcome people with disabilities into your congregation, you have to want to welcome them. The fifth, disability ministry is not a ministry to, it is a ministry with. People with disabilities are not simply objects of assistance. They are agents. They have gifts to offer the congregation. They will enrich your congregation. God will work through them. They may be prayer warriors. They may have the gift of hospitality. They may help serve communion. They may be called into ordained ministry. But we need to have eyes to see the gifts and empower them to live their callings in the life of the church. I want to show you another video here. This is of a current student at United. His name is Zach Holler, and he's participating in a ministry that was started by a United graduate, Caleb Spiker, at Sulphur Grove, the YMCA campus of Sulphur Grove United Methodist Church.
Huber Heights is reaching out to a group of people who may not otherwise have a place that's suited for them to worship on Sundays. 2 News reporter Kelly King shows us how the effort is an example of what's working here in the Miami Valley.
It's an unlikely place for a church service, but this YMCA in Huber Heights every Sunday transforms itself into a church to unite families and individuals with disabilities in prayer. On the outside, a typical Y. On the inside, a religious experience families won't get anywhere else.
Everyone, welcome to gentle worship at the Y.
Church is really hard because, this idea of sitting for an hour silently in one place is unrealistic.
But not for families at Sulphur Grove United Methodist Church in Huber Heights.
The rules of staying seated and quiet and pious have been thrown out the door.
The gentle worship service is designed to give people with disabilities an outlet to pray and practice religion comfortably. People can walk around, eat, and talk with one another in a more mellow setting.
Do not be afraid. We bring the lights down, bring the volume down.
It's a safe haven for people like Zach Holler. Zach uses a motorized wheelchair and is partially blind and deaf.
I just pray that those who need you more are here, and those that aren't here will come to you.
He relies on help from others to communicate. He takes part in gentle worship on Sundays with his family.
Expect the fullness of God's blessing.
Hoping to follow in the same footsteps as his pastor.
He is a wonderful man. I am so blessed to be working with him as my mentor.
Zach is studying ministry at the United Theological Seminary. His passion is to work with other people affected by disabilities.
Our goal is to see people of all abilities together in worship.
The gentle service began about a year and a half ago after the pastor realized the need in the community. As the service continues to grow, he's hoping for even more support, as there's no place he'd rather be. In the new year, the church will be moving gentle worship services from Sundays to Wednesdays so more people have transportation. Reporting in Huber Heights, Kelly King, 2 News, working for you.
Yeah. Praise God. Zach came to us a few years ago and said that he wanted to go to seminary. I said, well, I don't quite know how this is going to work or how we're going to do this, but we're going to do this. And it's been working. I mean, he's been doing a great job. And he's actually here this week. He's going to be leading a breakout session. And so I would really encourage you to sign up for that. He's a remarkable guy. Okay, here's my final point. Once you get into reading about theology, Bible, and disability, you can't really think about theology in a disembodied way anymore. Faith isn't just about the spiritual. From our conception to our resurrection, our existence is embodied. And theology that doesn't deal with this probably isn't very good theology. I mean, have you ever noticed how much of the Bible concerns bodies? Just read through these stories. Read the Psalms. We get these stories about food and hunger, fertility, sex, birth, death, riches, poverty, violence, acts of mercy. These populate the pages of our sacred scripture. And the Bible isn't so much an otherworldly book as it is a book about the transcendent God's involvement in the embodied existence of human beings. The embodiment of this human life means that we're vulnerable. And we don't like that. Western culture rebels against this idea of vulnerability in futile attempts to incarnate the qualities of beauty and strength that are held up to us as ideal. But in the incarnation, God did the opposite of this. God took on all of the vulnerability, all of the condition, all of the contingency of the human condition. And what this teaches us is that the vulnerability of our own lives and the lives of others is not something to be hidden away and not something to be ashamed of, not something to be avoided. It is the means that God chose to bring salvation into the world. Let me say that again. The vulnerability of human life is the means that God chose to bring salvation into the world. And part of what being the father of a disabled child has taught me is to acknowledge my own vulnerability, my own human frailty, to admit that I am able-bodied, but temporarily so, and that life does not consist in what I can accomplish, but in the way in which God can work through this fragile vessel to bring the light of Christ to others. I want to conclude by saying a few words about one of the greatest friends of people with disabilities who has ever lived. His name is Jean Vanier. 1964, Vanier, who was a Roman Catholic French-Canadian priest, took two men into his home. Their names were Raphael and Philippe. Raphael and Philippe had been living in an asylum because both lived with very significant intellectual disabilities. And when Vanier took them in, this was the beginning of what came to be called the L'Arche community. And the idea behind L'Arche is simply life together. People who are able-bodied live with people with intellectual and physical disabilities as assistants. And the philosophy behind L'Arche is one of mutuality. You do not go to L'Arche simply to assist. You go to L'Arche to be in community, to be in a relationship of mutuality, to receive as well as to give. And L'Arche has now expanded to over 135 communities, 140 communities in 35 countries and 5 continents. So I want to show you a video of Vanier explaining the philosophy behind L'Arche.
Every time I see a man or woman with a severe mental handicap, the incredible cry that is coming from them, what I would call the primal cry, which is, do you love me? It's a very deep cry. And you find with people with mental handicaps, this is their, do you love me? Why have I been abandoned? Or has my life any value? Somewhere this cry of, do you want to be my friend? Touched me. I began visiting asylums, hospitals, different institutions, families, and I discovered an immense world of pain which I had never could have imagined. So I discovered all this world which I hadn't even imagined existed. And it seemed very clear to me that Jesus was asking me just to take 1 or 2 men and to start living together. So I was able to buy a small broken down house, and I welcomed 2 men, Raphael and Philippe, from an institution. Raphael had had a meningitis. He couldn't walk very well. He couldn't speak very well. Philippe had had an encephalitis, one arm paralyzed, one leg paralyzed, living in a world of dream, but also with quite a severe mental handicap. We began to live together, and I did the cooking, so we didn't eat very well. We did everything together. We cooked, we worked in the garden together. We fought together. We prayed together. We forgave each other. And so a whole sort of journey began. Little by little I began by thinking that I could do good for them. But then as the days and then the months moved on, I began to discover what they were doing for me, transforming me, changing me. I thought I was going to teach them something, and suddenly I was discovering that they were teaching me quite a bit. When Jesus says, "Whoever welcomes one of these little ones in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the Father, or the one who sent me." And when Jesus says that I was in prison and you visited me, I was sick and you visited me, I was naked and you clothed me, I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me to drink, I was a stranger, I was strange, I was different, and you welcomed me. Well, it's really true. And I never knew this. I mean, I'd read it in the Gospels, but I didn't know what it meant. And I must say that there is what I've learned from people like Eric, that what is important in human relationships is discover that God has led us together. I feel that very clearly for myself, that it was Jesus who brought me to handicapped people. And I know the day that I welcomed Raphael and Philippe, I knew, and I know today, that it was an irreversible act, that in welcoming Raphael and Philippe, it was a covenant that I was entering into.
There's so much more to be said about the lives of people with disabilities and ministry with people with disabilities than can be said in 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes. So I've put some additional resources on my blog if you're interested in learning more about this ministry, and there are tips on there about how to start a disability ministry. All the videos I've shown, as well as the sources of the information that I've used today, are on there as well. As I said when I started, I'm a guy who's working it out. And if you're watching this and thinking, I don't know where to start, that's okay. At least you're working it out too. And the most important thing is that you see the need and want to do something about it. And God will help you through the rest. Thank you for the privilege of being here with you today.